Good day, everyone, and welcome to the 2022 International Women's Day celebration. Parts of the celebration this year at IDRC is to convene one of our panel on women informal workers and what needs to change, particularly in a time of pandemic. I'm Jean Lebel. I'm the president of the International Development Research Center, and it's a pleasure for me as the head of a Canadian Crown Corporation to be part of this event. We are part of Canada Foreign Affairs and Development Efforts. IDRC champions and fund research and innovation within and alongside developing region to drive global change. Thank you for joining us for this discussion. It promised to be extremely interesting. Je m'exprimerai principalement en anglais au cours de la discussion aujourd'hui, mais nous vous offrons une version française de notre conversation sur notre chaîne YouTube. International Women's Day is an opportunity to celebrate progress and the achievement of women around the world. It is also a time to examine the significant challenges women continue to face and the important work we need to do together to achieve gender equality. The UN Women theme for this year's International Women's Day is Gender Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow. This theme recognizes women and girls around the world who are building a more sustainable future for all. Advancing gender equality is fundamental to a sustainable future. However, as we approach the second anniversary of the COVID-19 pandemic, decades of progress are under threat, as we all know. Globally, women informal workers are among the groups hit hardest by the pandemic and the least likely, due to their informal status, to benefit from government support. In 2021, the International Labour Organization World Employment and Social Outlook report found that informal workers were 3 times more likely than formal workers and 1.6 times more likely than the self-employed to lose their job as a result of the pandemic. That's huge. Many have seen their incomes plummet and recovery has been slow, if not inexistent. The pandemic has revealed and reinforced existing inequities, but it also provides an opportunity to correct past failing and build back a more gender-inclusive society. Let's think about half of the population today. If they are not contributing to society, we are losing a complete asset of our world. Today's conversation will focus on what we are learning from emerging evidence about the pandemic impact on women, informal workers, and what needs to change. We will look at the effect of lockdowns and restriction on care responsibility for women, which have grown substantially during the pandemic. And we will also discuss recommendations for policy change and other action to support a strong, equitable, and sustainable recovery. And we are very lucky today to have 3 leading experts with us, and I'm going to introduce them right now. First, Carmen Roca. Carmen, welcome.
Thank you.
Carmen is talking to us from Lima in Peru. She is the Lima Focal City Coordinator with WIEGO. WIEGO stands for Women on Informal Employment, Globalizing and Organizing, an NGO that is well renowned as a long track record of support in the field of informal employment. Social protection for the working poor in the informal economy is one of the key areas of focus I was mentioning, and Carmen will report today on the work that she has done. Janhavi Dave, good morning, good day, should I say, since you are in Bangalore, the city of eternal spring in India. Welcome, Janhavi.
Thank you.
You are the international coordinator of HomeNet International, a global network of 36 home-based worker organizations in 20 countries, representing over 600,000 workers. Impressive. welcome again. And finally, my colleague Gillian Dowie, based in New Delhi in our Asia regional office. Gillian is a senior program officer with our program, Sustainable Inclusive Economies. Welcome, Gillian, and you are in Delhi, I assume.
I am, yes.
Good. So let's start with our first round. Let's get this conversation going. The floor will be yours. And as we always say at IDRC, we help to build the platform. You are now delivering the keynote this morning or today. Carmen, your organization, WIEGO, has done an 11-city study on the pandemic's impacts on informal workers, including in Lima, where you're located. How has COVID-19 impacted the women you work with?
Thank you, Jean. And it's a pleasure to be here, being a former IDRC staff member. I'm really happy to join this conversation this morning. And also want to say that we in WIEGO are very grateful to IDRC for the support along the study that we conducted. The panorama is a little bit devastating. The study that we did, Jean, looked at 3 moments in time. So February 2020, which is before the pandemic started, June, which is 3 months into the lockdowns, and then a year after, 2021, June, to see how things had evolved. In the first round of the study, we would see that people were desperate to go back to work, and that was the largest demand. To be able to go back to work without evictions, without punitive measures, in a way that was healthy for themselves, for their clients. However, this so expected return to work, a year after, they tell us that was marked by a decrease in income, in sales, in clients, and in employers in the case of domestic workers. In Lima, in particularly, we looked at 4 sectors of informal employment: street vendors, which is the largest sector of self-employed workers in Peru, then domestic workers, which follows, then newspaper vendors, because they were allowed to work during the pandemic, and waste pickers, because they work hand in hand with the municipal government. So we looked at the impact of the pandemic and the economic crisis on them. The impact of the illness, particularly in Peru, was so strong that people lost more than 10 days of work along several months during the year, mainly because of caring for self or for others because of COVID. The largest impact that you can see is in food security. People have stopped eating as they used in the past. 84% of them are either skipping meals or reducing completely the variety of what they ate before. They have experienced hunger during the year in between June 2020 and 2021 in large figures. And this is comparable to Dakar and Durban in Africa. To cover or to cope with the crisis, imagine you're in a household of several members. Most of you are migrants, first or second generation from the Andean region. Maybe somebody in your home has a formal job, but he lost it because of the economic crisis. So you have to rely on your self-employed work and your daily earnings to survive. However, to cover the costs of the illness, because you take a family member to the hospital, but they still ask you to pay for the medicines and to bring every day something that the patient needs. What do? You have already spent your savings in the first months of the lockdown that you couldn't go out to work. So you go into more debt. You were already in debt. Now you go into more debt. And who do you get funds from? It's informal lenders. 80% of those who needed to take loans went to informal lenders. And these are not, very bad people somewhere in the city. These are neighbors, family members also who lend you money in conditions that are like, if you take $100, you're going to pay 20% of that every month until you can repay the $100. So the cost is incredibly high, and that puts a burden on the woman, especially, and the household.
And
children.
Carmen,
Yes.
if I can interrupt you here, in let's take Peru, and maybe Lima. What is the size of this informal economy in terms of, informal worker? Just to give our audience an idea that this is not marginal. It's quite important. Do you have some numbers to share with us?
Exactly. And that's a very, very good point, Jean, because this is marginalized in the view of the population, and it is the largest segment of employment in the country. So Peru is, before the pandemic, it was 73% informal employment. But if you take out everything that is agriculture, livestock, fishing, it's 65% of employment. But the largest category, when you look at all the segments of informal employment, the self-employed are the majority, which means that in the whole of the country, the self-employed in urban areas are the majority of the people who are working. And within them, street vendors are the largest sector. So, we always think
that represent millions of people.
Yes, exactly. It's 57% informal employment just in the capital in Lima. Of course, Lima is purely, urban and has the largest percentage of formal employment in the, compared to the rest of the country. And still, we are above half of the people working in formal employment, and the majority of them being self-employed, being in trade and street trade.
And we are at International Women's Day celebration over here. You mentioned the care burden that often, if not almost exclusively, end up on women's shoulder. So tell me a little bit more about this, as the country was facing, as the rest of the world, a pandemic, governance situation that was also, with the presidency that was moving on, some uncertainty there, an economic, downturn to a certain extent. So how do women in particular cope with all of this?
We have in Peru a large number of households headed by women. And this is, I won't get into the reasons for that. But, there's the economic responsibility of having to feed your children and being sometimes the only earner. But in addition to that, Jean, we were in online schooling for 2 full school years. 2 full school years that our children have been online. It has been difficult for everyone, no matter, what kind of income you have, where in the society you're placed. So imagine for a woman that has several children, she has to connect their children online. And yes, the government responded in showing the school on the national TV channel that anybody can reach on their TV without cable or anything. But you needed to contact your teacher to get the homework, to be, to report that you have been watching the show that is for your year of school. And that means that you have to have some sort of balance on your prepaid phone. That means that every day you have to recharge a little bit of your phone. So that's an extra expense on top of, being on top of what your children are doing and not having other people able to care for them because they're either ill or they're not supposed to mix households, right? You're also scared of them being sick. In larger homes where you have several people, you have also senior people, the parents, the grandparents, and it's women who have to care for them. And they were the ones who got more, sicker, let's say, the illness was more severe on them. So they report in the study, the majority of them, that duties related to care for children or elderly people, cleaning, because, at the beginning without COVID, you had to clean everything, that it was contagious on any surface. So the using of Clorox was, very vast here.
Ubiquitous. It was all over.
Yes. So the cleaning, the care, the cooking, everything increased. And this is mostly on the women. So it has been a very difficult time. And you know where we see that? In the mental health. People, when they are asked an open question, what was the greatest impact of COVID for you? They say, well, the illness, seeing the people die, and, the anxiety, the sadness, not only for the people who departed, but not knowing when this is going to end. So depression, anxiety is what we see in them.
Carmen, it is fascinating. We'll come back to you, to have a few thoughts on what can we do. But Let's jump now, over the oceans and continent, take it eastbound or westbound. We're going to India and Bangalore. We're going to be with Javi. And Javi, it's you that has, some grip with HomeNet South Asia on the impact of COVID on home-based worker, which is, very important in the region, in other region too. But, in India, I think, and South Asia, it's quite important. So give us, the finding of the research you conducted around 7 countries with those workers that are working from home. Up to you.
Thank you. Thank you, John, for giving me the space to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on women home-based workers and also talk about some of their needs. Our sister organization, HomeNet South Asia, conducted the impact study in 12 locations in 7 countries in South Asia in partnership with IDRC and WIEGO. So we use the same questionnaire which Carmen talked about, so we looked at the same timeline, February 2020, pre-crisis period, peak lockdown period. For South Asia, it was between April to June 2020. And then we did the second round of the study, which was mid-2021. And of course, they're very interesting findings and lots of them, but I'll only focus on 3 of them and also touch upon what really worked for women home-based workers. So the first finding is around the earning and the work. So just to mention that the work, there was 0 work or no work for almost 70% women home-based workers during the peak lockdown. Now, this is no surprise because they didn't have access to raw material or work contracts, but this actually didn't improve majorly. Again, in 2021, almost 42% of the same respondents talked about the fact that they still didn't have any work. While this data seems to, when we talk about it, it looks as if it's improved, but actually it hasn't translated into regular work. We looked at, do they have 5 to 7 days of work per week, which they used to have during pre-crisis period. When we talk about peak lockdown, 33% respondents talked about the fact that they did have 5 to 7 days of work. Now, this seems to have further reduced last year. When we keep talking about recovery, this data should have increased, should have improved, but that hasn't really been the case. So the regular work is not there. In fact, I was in Ahmedabad some time back, and they talked about pre-crisis period and post-crisis. They actually that woman had 1 day of work per week, and which translated into very, very low income, which was like 10% of her income from the previous time. Now, in terms of earning that we talk about, of course, it's not the same as pre-crisis period, but even mid-2021, this in 6 locations, people have talked about reducing the income as compared to peak lockdown. So there's been absolutely no recovery for women home-based workers. In fact, WIEGO study, which has looked at other sectors of informal economy workers, they also talk about the fact that for women home-based workers, the recovery has been the worst out of the lot of the street vendors, waste pickers, domestic workers, and home-based workers.
And, like for Carmen, give me a picture, of what is this, image that we should have of this type of work. Its amplitude, I know, for example, the garment industry rely largely, often, some segment on workers at home. So tell me what it does for a woman, and what is the size of this portion of the informal economy in the region you're working?
Right. Thank you for asking me that question. Actually, ILO did this large study of home-based workers, and this is 2019, and there are approximately 260 million home-based workers across the world. Now, we don't have country data, but WIEGO has this excellent statistics team, and they have looked at country level data, and they've covered 4 countries in South Asia, which is India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Nepal. And just in these 4 countries, there are over 64 million home-based workers, and majority of them are women. And these women, when you talk about specifically garment sector, they could be doing, a range of work. A lot of it is like, what they say, embroidery work, very skilled work, to very, what these brands would call low-end work of cutting threads, stitching buttons, but they do this work 8 to 10 hours a day. So it's like a full-time job, but sitting from their home and not from the factory.
Yeah, and that represents, a huge burden in terms of workload when you have also to take care of domestic sphere, and also you're facing, a sanitary crisis that, in the case of India, has hit hard with the Delta variant last year, and it's still, present. So we'll come back to you also with more for solution. Before that, we get the perspective of Gillian about the impact of this COVID-19 pandemic in women's in the informal sector, but particularly looking at the digital platforms, the gig economy, as we call it in our lingo, for finding, contracts, work. What is the situation, Gillian?
Thanks, Jean. I think the digital economy is often treated as a kind of solution to crises, but it's important to be talking about it in this context so we can think about it a bit more critically based on the evidence and experience of women who went to work online. So the use of digital platforms for finding work, and right now I'm referring specifically to those on-demand task matching platforms similar to Uber or something in their design, for example, have really taken off over the last couple of years, but was of course already growing rapidly all over the world before the pandemic started. It's true that many informal workers who had their normal jobs or their systems of finding jobs interrupted went online as a new way to supplement their income, particularly for occupations like domestic work, cleaning and other care services, temporary childcare arrangements, and so on. Platforms are often seen as avenues for formalization of traditionally informal jobs, or as job creators, an opportunity to find new and more work. But the nature of that kind of on-demand domestic work doesn't really challenge informal work arrangements in the end. The vast majority of workers continue to be excluded from social protection schemes and benefits. The work continues to be precarious, it carries risk, and grievance mechanisms, if a negative client interaction does happen, is reported by most women workers to be really inadequate and mostly really client-centric. So the experience was mixed during the pandemic. Platforms did offer an avenue to make an income for some, but came with many of the same challenges as traditional informal work. There were fewer jobs for more workers, no access to sick leaves or personal protective equipment in the beginning. In a lot of cases, there were transport issues and discrimination in accessing people's homes and their communities. And I think the other type of platform work really relevant to this conversation and for informal workers, including, for example, home-based workers, artisans, and those who pivoted in the pandemic to, for example, home cooking, are e-commerce platforms, thinking here of like the Amazons and the Etsy's. A lot of workers did try to get by in the interim through selling goods that they make online, jewelry or clothing, wedding textiles, and so on. And there is a real opportunity there. In a study in Delhi, a number of home cooks and artisans did manage to use platforms or even social media like Facebook to really generate new business to the point that they plan to continue this full time after the pandemic. But it's important to note that many of those women are more so, I would call them more so entrepreneurs than informal workers. And they started from a more secure position with better access to, better understanding of platforms and stronger support systems. When we're really focusing on informal workers who are already coming from sort of lower income brackets at the outset, who are more vulnerable, the entry barriers were really just too high. The fees from the large food delivery platforms or sales platforms were in many cases just too much to be able to turn a profit. But without those platforms and some marketing capacity, this kind of amazing ability to put yourself on Instagram and things like that, it's extremely challenging to get enough visibility via social media to actually, make a steady income.
Gillian, is this a system, the gig economy, with the risk that you are outlining of, this dream vision of flexibility, isn't it also something that can, really create a divide between, gender, and then some type of work really apply to male and they are better paid and they are flexible. But because of all the burden, the care, the health, the education that falls on the shoulder of women, this flexibility doesn't exist for women. What is the situation? Is there a genderization of the gig economy and differences?
For sure. Yeah. Gig work can really give women a lot of control over their schedule in order to accommodate the many other responsibilities that they have. And it is an opportunity given the reality of the care and unpaid work that women are balancing with paid work, and particularly informal workers with inadequate support systems. But the nature of that platform-driven work doesn't challenge these social and gendered norms. It accommodates them. Women are mostly represented in domestic work or care work-focused platforms, and the flexibility allows paid work to fit unpaid care work, but without meaningfully addressing redistribution or reduction of that care work. So beyond that, there's also other issues like related to flexibility, related to the ability of women to take advantage of these spaces. Research does show that the time online required to secure jobs can be really high, especially with more workers using platforms. And often the distance to jobs isn't in the control of the workers. They don't get to choose, and the transport costs aren't covered. And then in the pandemic, as we've already heard, there's the added challenge of children being at home doing online schooling for the better part of 2 years and requiring access to a device. And if you have one device, that device is probably being prioritized for children in the family. So in some ways, platforms can address the need for flexibility, but without really making gains on women's disproportionate responsibility for care.
So now let's move to the second round. And, contrary to the script, we'll go in reverse order. So I'll start with you, Gillian, and tell us, what kind of policies and practice we can develop to address those inequity in the gig economy.
Sure. There are so many areas that we can talk about to improve conditions. And fundamentally, at the policy level, inclusion in social protection and the systems to ensure equal access to online spaces and skills are essential. But to focus on really improving conditions for women in particular who are working online to make the work tangibly different from traditional informal work from the side of platforms, I would emphasize really strongly on ratings and grievances and on wages, like for the purpose of this discussion. The rating system on platforms can lead to consequences for workers like getting deactivated. But research with women platform owners, including that we've supported IDRC, finds that the reasons for these low ratings aren't verified and are not really communicated and explained. And if the same is true of a client, if the rating that they receive, because clients do receive ratings, are very low, they're very unlikely to be deactivated, and workers will still go to their home to perform whatever domestic function is required. And this also applies to grievances. Out of fear of a low rating, sometimes workers don't report behavior, sort of questionable behavior from clients, or don't confront them in the moment. And even when they do, they often report that the grievances don't get resolved in a way that's transparent to them, that they're included in. Women who enter households and provide domestic services and childcare, they're also screened, of course, police reports, references, and so on. But they don't know if the same is true of their clients. So there's this big information asymmetry that's quite a big problem. And then finally, the last thing is that there's usually no bargaining on wages or service fees. In most on-demand platforms, the rates are fixed by an algorithm. And in a bidding system, the rates can be driven really low, and platforms rarely provide a sort of minimum earning. So there are a number of steps that platforms can take to make all of these issues more transparent and more fair, to improve working conditions. And I would also say that we know from this discussion today as well, and from many other experiences we've had, that women collectivizing can be transformative in their working lives. And this is true online as well. Research has shown that women have set up sort of separate communication channels to flag clients or discuss wages. And to go a step further, some worker collectives are exploring platforms managed in a cooperative setup led by workers, which gives them a lot more control over all of these different challenges that they have in these spaces. There's still a lot to learn about success factors in these business models, but starting from the experience of women informal worker collectives can be really instrumental, I think, to improve these conditions.
Well, a perfect illustration of why research is needed over here. You just opened a door that I never saw. about, the interaction between the gig economy, the governance of data, and the management of the business, which, is the principle, the basis, the foundation for this economy, trusting. And, it can so easy to disconstruct this trust by, whatever, technological tool. Thank you very much. Fascinating. Now let's move to, and I'm looking, on my screen, let's move there because, Javi is on my right-hand side. Javi at HomeNet South Asia. What would be the recommendation to help this recovery for women home-based worker? Well, what would you do pragmatically with this little magic wand?
Thank you. So there, the recommendations that we have are actually not very new recommendations. We've been talking about the same thing, but this study actually has equipped us with data to show that this works. So the first and foremost is we need to invest in organizing. Members who are part of trade unions could access social assistance programs, which otherwise workers couldn't. If they were part of cooperatives and producer companies, they could still access work, which other home-based workers couldn't. So investing in organizing is very important. Second, universalization of social protection and inclusion of home-based workers in social protection. Include childcare, make childcare part of social protection because it's very important for women home-based workers. The third is have specific recovery program for home-based workers. You can't have these general programs. Talk about skills training, talk about digital access. We need to have specific programs for home-based workers. And last, we need to have more research and advocacy for policies for home-based workers. We have to hold the government responsible. We need to have country-level policies. We need to hold employers responsible, have code of conducts, and include home-based workers into those code of conducts. Have policies for employer countries, advocate for policies where for Europe, for Canada, hold the employers responsible in their own countries for the due diligence process. So I'd end here. So these are some top level recommendations that I would have.
Well, that's very, very pragmatic, very focused. Thank you for this. Let's move now. And Carmen, thank you, Javi. Carmen, you have been waiting as I went, in the reverse order for some time. With the work of WIEGO, often, you have a long tradition of work and organizing and helping. What would be the policy recommendation that workers are calling for their recovery in the context that you described earlier, the informal economy?
Thanks, John. The first is that the crisis is not over and it has been so severe that relief is still necessary. When people got a cash grant, at least in the case of Peru, it was the equivalent of $100 and it was supposed to last for months and months. So it was used for immediate needs like food and for paying debt with your utilities, your water bills, your electricity bills, and then debt that you had contracted because of all the things you had to pay for. So relief is still needed and it has become stagnant or not existent anymore in most countries. And then for recovery, people need access to finance that is adequate, that freezes interest payments for a long time, and that considers the repaying capacity, because it is there, of informal workers, but that it goes in tandem with their earning and expense cycles. So it's just providing the access to loans that is not similar to the informal lenders' patterns. And one that is very important, if government cannot help too much, it should not harm either. And we are talking about evictions, confiscation of goods, which means that I take the whole of your working capital and you have to start again just because you were placed somewhere that I didn't like you to work there. So it's providing spaces that are safe, that have a commercial logic, because you cannot plan to relocate me to somewhere where I will find no clients and my clients will go back to where we were before and then new vendors will be there. And also in the case of domestic workers, Jean, the loss of employment has been of such level. We're talking about 120,000 domestic workers losing their jobs by the end of 2020. If it had been a private enterprise losing, people ending without jobs in that amount, there would have been a rescue package for that firm. However, because domestic workers are deemed to be scattered and, there is nothing that can be done. But they could be working in government offices, doing cleaning, doing cooking. And actually, what is needed in the medium long term is to have an employment insurance for them to be able to cope with crises like this, because employers let them go, didn't hire them back once the lockdowns were over. And then another very important aspect is that, as you said, this is large numbers of the population, a large portion of the workforce. We need to have it registered, and people will not do it voluntarily unless there are incentives. And the incentive is, I give you credit, I give you a childcare spot, I support your plans for relocation for a new business, but I need to have you registered so that my social protection programs will reach you. That is very, very important. And finally, informal employment is not an issue only from national government. It's not an issue of municipalities. It is an issue that involves everybody. And there's never that political will to sit around the table with both levels of government. And we need that. We've been working in Lima for more than 10 years. And we now know that we won't advance unless we have a high-level commission with the political will of sitting all the actors around the table and really make a change and adjust that change according to the sector of the informal employment we're talking. It is different what the street vendor needs from what a domestic worker needs, from what a waste picker needs, but it can be done.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you, Janhavi. Thank you, Gillian. This morning for us in Ottawa, today for you in South Asia, and also this morning for Carmen, you have demonstrated, the value of having a conversation where there are factual evidence that are telling a story. The research process gave you the opportunity here to demonstrate to our audience that this informal economy is an important element of society. It cannot be ignored because it's informal. It shows that there are, differences that are deeply entrenched and systemic in terms of equality. There is a disproportionate group of persons that are suffering from COVID-19 around the world. Part of this is in the informal sector, and within the informal sector, women, as you have demonstrated, are, largely affected, and many are still, struggling, having all kind of responsibility. You brought the evidence also in a very short period of time about the need to be innovative and to push for the change. And what a better way to ask for a change when you have the evidence, the data that shows that we can do better and help the policy process at every level for what? For making a difference in the life and livelihood of the whole community, but without forgetting 50% of its population. And that 50% are women. They are critical, they are leader, they are entrepreneur, they are service provider, but they are humans. And as human, it's a fundamental right to work. And it's a fundamental right to work in good condition. And it's a fundamental right that you receive from government the support you deserve, whoever you are and whatever are the type of activity you're conducting in order to be productive for society. It is a pleasure for me to have spoken with you, to have seen from the ground the evidence that drives your passion, but not a passion that is based on simply, a feeling of doing good, but also the evidence that shows that this is feasible. And for this, I'm very thankful. I hope that our audience will have liked this International Women's Days panel that look at the informal economy, look at the impact of COVID, and look at illustrative case of what can be done to improve the situation. I encourage you to look at the website of the organization of our colleague, Carmen Roca with WIEGO, Janhavi Dave with HomeNet International, and Gillian with IDRC. Whether it's care economy, whether it's informal sector, whether it's sustainability, we haven't touched much on this morning. It was not the topic. I encourage you to look at these websites. This brings us to the end. It has been truly a pleasure. On behalf of all my colleagues at IDRC, please accept my thanks and carry them to your teams that are doing fantastic work in the field in order to make life better for everyone, and women in particular. Thank you very much.